At the edge of a sprawling estate, tucked away in a quiet corner of the billionaire's vast property, stood a horse that defied everything. A wild, powerful Appaloosa, its coat speckled with patches of white and brown. It was as untamable as a storm. No matter how many trainers the billionaire brought in, no matter how much money was spent on the finest facilities, the horse remained a force of nature, impossible to control. The billionaire, a man accustomed to buying solutions, was losing hope. He had purchased the horse with grand plans of turning it into a showpiece, a symbol of his wealth and success. But the Appaloosa had other ideas. It broke fences, tore through stables, and bucked off every rider who dared approach. The horse's spirit was unbroken, its rebellion fierce and unyielding. The billionaire's patience was running thin, and whispers of his failure began to spread. Then, a name reached his ears, an old rancher, long past the age of seeking fame or fortune, who was said to have a special way with horses. This rancher didn't rely on modern methods or the latest equipment. His approach was simple: trust, patience, and respect. Skeptical but desperate, the billionaire decided to give it a try. When the rancher arrived, dressed in worn boots and a weathered hat, he didn't promise miracles. He didn't claim to know magic. He simply stood quietly in front of the horse, his presence calm and steady. The billionaire watched from the sidelines, certain that even this legendary rancher wouldn't be able to tame the wild spirit of his prized Appaloosa. Little did he know, the rancher was about to prove him wrong, without lifting a finger. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the struggle to tame the wild Appaloosa became more desperate. The billionaire's estate, once a symbol of opulence and grandeur, now felt like a battleground. Every corner of the property seemed marked by the chaos left in the horse's wake: broken fences, torn-up paddocks, and barns in disrepair. Trainers from all over the country had been called in, their resumes boasting impressive credentials and accolades. Yet, despite their experience, none could make a dent in the Appaloosa's wild heart. The horse was magnificent, a creature of raw beauty and strength. But it was also a living force of rebellion. No matter how many times the trainers approached with kindness or force, coaxing or commanding, the Appaloosa remained untamable. It would buck, rear, and charge in all directions, leaving trainers sprawling in the dust. Even the most skilled among them were thrown from its back, their pride and their bodies bruised. The billionaire grew frustrated. He had spent millions on this project, hiring the best trainers, building the finest stables, and even bringing in exotic horse specialists. But nothing worked. Each failed attempt only deepened his sense of failure. People started to talk behind his back. Whispers spread through his social circles, mocking the billionaire who couldn't tame a horse. At the high-end galas and lavish parties, the Appaloosa became the talk of the town, not for its beauty, but for its defiance. The billionaire tried to hide his growing irritation, but it became clear that the horse was getting the best of him. In private moments, he would stare out at the horse, wondering what went wrong. How had he, a man who built an empire with sheer willpower and wealth, met his match in a creature so free-spirited and wild? The horse seemed to mock him, its defiance like a constant reminder of his limitations. His frustration grew into a quiet anger. He called in yet another expert, a famous horse trainer who promised to take on the challenge. This time, the billionaire was certain. He had to succeed. Failure was no longer an option. The trainer arrived, full of confidence, his reputation preceding him. But when he saw the Appaloosa, his face fell. The horse eyed him with disdain, its stance wide and unyielding. The trainer's first approach was swift and forceful. He attempted to rope the horse, pulling it into submission with swift movements and loud commands. But the horse was faster, more agile, and infinitely smarter than any of them had anticipated. It dodged, darted away, and within minutes had shattered the sense of control the trainer had built. The billionaire watched from the sidelines, his hopes crumbling with every failed attempt. It was becoming clear, no amount of money or power could control the wild spirit of this horse. And the billionaire, who had once seen himself as a man who could conquer anything, began to feel the sting of defeat. His empire had been built on control, on owning and taming things. But this horse, this Appaloosa, was something different. It had the kind of freedom that no amount of wealth could ever buy. The billionaire was at his breaking point, his pride bruised, and his spirit broken. Yet, there was one last hope, a whisper of a man, the old rancher who had tamed even the wildest of creatures. He was the only one left to turn to. Reluctantly, the billionaire decided to give him a chance. But deep down, he doubted that anyone could accomplish what all his money, power, and experts had failed to do. As the rancher arrived at the estate, the billionaire watched, his doubts still lingering. But little did he know, this was the moment everything was about to change. The old rancher arrived quietly, like a whisper on the wind. He was dressed simply, wearing faded jeans, a weathered cowboy hat, and boots that had seen more dirt than polish. Unlike the flashy trainers who had come before him, he didn't carry a briefcase filled with expensive equipment or a reputation to flaunt. His presence alone spoke volumes, and the billionaire couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope mixed with skepticism. When the rancher first stepped onto the estate, he didn't rush to the stables or immediately assess the horse's condition. He didn't demand anything. Instead, he simply stood at the edge of the paddock and observed from a distance. His eyes, deep-set and calm, never left the Appaloosa, which stood on the far side of the field, its coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. The horse watched him too, its gaze steady and curious, but filled with an edge of caution. It was clear that the Appaloosa had grown accustomed to human interference, but not to understanding. The billionaire watched the rancher from his mansion's balcony, wondering what, if anything, the old man was doing. He had expected some grand, dramatic approach, a flashy technique, perhaps, or a quick solution that would prove he was the right man for the job. But the rancher simply stood there, his hands resting loosely at his sides, as though he had all the time in the world. The billionaire couldn't understand it. This wasn't what he was used to. Money could get you the best trainers, the best equipment, and the best methods, but it couldn't buy patience or the kind of quiet authority the rancher exuded. Hours passed, and the rancher didn't make a move. He didn't attempt to approach the horse, nor did he try to coax it with food or tricks. He remained still, his presence grounded, as if he was part of the very land itself. The Appaloosa grew more curious, its body language shifting from defensive to interested. It slowly inched closer, its hooves soft against the earth, until it stood just a few yards away from the rancher. Finally, when the horse had moved within reach, the rancher took a slow, deliberate step forward. He didn't charge or make any sudden movements. He simply extended his hand, palm out, towards the horse. The Appaloosa flinched at first, its instincts telling it to run, but the rancher didn't pull away. He stood there, motionless, allowing the horse to decide when, or if, it would come closer. Minutes passed. The horse hesitated, its eyes darting from the rancher's face to his extended hand. Then, slowly, as if deciding that the man was no threat, it stepped closer. The billionaire watched from the distance, his breath caught in his throat. This wasn't the way he had expected it to unfold. Where were the tools? Where were the commands? This was different. The rancher's approach was as much about understanding as it was about action. He wasn't trying to dominate the horse, he was trying to communicate with it. He wasn't using force, he was using trust. He spoke to the horse, softly, in a low voice, the words incomprehensible but filled with a quiet confidence. There was no hurry in his voice, no urgency. He was simply allowing the horse to process, to take its time. The Appaloosa, still wary, stepped closer. The rancher didn't reach out or make any attempt to grab the horse's reins. Instead, he stayed calm, letting the horse move on its own terms. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the horse sniffed his hand, its nostrils flaring as it took in the scent of the man. For the first time, the Appaloosa didn't pull away. It didn't resist. There was a subtle shift in the air, an unspoken connection was being made. The billionaire, watching from his balcony, felt a wave of disbelief. He had expected the rancher to jump into action, to show off some flashy technique. Instead, the old man was simply there. Just being. And the horse, this wild, untamable creature, seemed to be responding. The Appaloosa's body language had softened. Its muscles, which had been tense and coiled with anxiety, began to relax. The rancher took another slow step forward, his movements fluid and gentle, never forcing the horse into anything. By the end of the day, the rancher hadn't ridden the horse, nor had he done anything that seemed remarkable. But something had changed. The Appaloosa was no longer darting away at every human presence. It stood in the same field, calm, its body alert but not fearful. The rancher left as quietly as he had arrived, nodding at the billionaire on his way out without saying a word. The billionaire was stunned. He had spent millions on equipment, on trainers, on advanced techniques, but it was this simple, patient man who had made the real difference. The horse had been tame, not because of a method or a tool, but because of the rancher's ability to connect on a deeper level, beyond power and force. It was a lesson the billionaire wasn't ready for, but one he would soon come to understand all too well. The rancher didn't need grandiose methods or promises. He only needed time, patience, and respect. And in that quiet, unassuming approach, the billionaire began to realize that maybe it wasn't the horse who needed taming, perhaps it was himself. As the days passed, something extraordinary began to unfold. The billionaire, still uncertain about the rancher's methods, watched from a distance with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Each morning, the rancher returned to the estate, always with the same calm demeanor, never rushing or demanding anything from the Appaloosa. He continued to approach the horse with quiet confidence, taking small steps to build trust, always respecting the animal's space. The horse, initially standoffish and wild, began to respond. One morning, after a week of this patient work, the rancher did something the billionaire had never expected. He walked slowly into the paddock, his eyes locked on the Appaloosa, and without a word, he climbed into the saddle. The billionaire's heart raced as he watched, but the rancher didn't rush the horse. His movements were deliberate and slow, as though he was asking the horse to join him, rather than forcing it into submission. The Appaloosa, surprisingly, didn't buck or rear. It stood still for a moment, as though processing this new dynamic. The rancher held the reins gently but firmly, his legs lightly guiding the horse, his posture relaxed. For the first time, the horse didn't fight. Instead, it shifted its weight, taking a hesitant step forward. The billionaire, who had been watching from behind the large windows of the estate, leaned forward in disbelief. It wasn't a perfect ride. The horse didn't immediately accept the rancher's presence without hesitation. There were moments of tension, moments when the Appaloosa wanted to throw him off. But the rancher remained calm, never pulling the reins harshly or tightening his grip. He simply shifted with the horse's movements, guiding it, communicating with the horse's body language. For the billionaire, it was like watching a miracle in slow motion. His mind raced with questions. How had this happened? What had changed? He had seen the rancher work with the horse. He had been close enough to observe, but the horse's transformation was something beyond his understanding. The rancher had done it without force, without grandeur. He had done it with quiet persistence. It was then that the billionaire realized something fundamental. This wasn't about controlling the horse. It was about listening to it, trusting it. And the rancher hadn't just tamed the Appaloosa. He had taught the billionaire a lesson about patience, respect, and the power of quiet strength. The transformation of the Appaloosa was more than just a change in behavior. It was a shift in the very nature of its spirit. The wild, untamable creature that had once charged through fences and thrown riders off with brutal force had become a calm, controlled companion. The process had been slow, gradual, and quiet, but it was now impossible to deny. The horse had changed. And so had the billionaire who owned it. It was a bright morning when the rancher decided it was time to show the billionaire the full extent of the Appaloosa's progress. The air was crisp, the field stretching out under a wide, clear sky. The billionaire stood at the edge of the paddock, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and disbelief. After weeks of observing, learning, and silently witnessing the transformation, he knew this was the moment that would prove everything. He had come to understand that it wasn't about the money or the power. It was about patience, respect, and listening. The rancher, as always, moved without haste. His movements were deliberate, each step measured, as he approached the Appaloosa. He had spent countless hours with the horse, but today felt different. Today, the horse wasn't a challenge, it was a partner. The Appaloosa's eyes, once full of distrust and wariness, now met the rancher's with a quiet understanding. It was as if the horse knew what was coming, and knew it was ready. Without any fanfare, the rancher stepped up to the horse and gently placed his hand on its shoulder. The Appaloosa stood still, its muscles loose, its breathing even. The rancher took a deep breath and swung his leg over the saddle. The horse barely flinched. It was a moment the billionaire had never expected. He had spent so many sleepless nights wondering if this moment would ever come, and now here it was. The horse was ready to be ridden, not with force or submission, but with cooperation. The billionaire watched, breathless, as the rancher lightly urged the Appaloosa into a slow walk. There was no struggle, no rearing up, no sudden bucking. The Appaloosa moved forward smoothly, as though it had been doing this for years. The rancher rode with ease, his posture relaxed, his connection to the horse so seamless it was almost as if they were one entity. For a moment, everything seemed to fall away, the luxury of the billionaire's life, the million-dollar stables, the lavish parties, and the distractions of wealth. What remained was something far more valuable, a moment of pure harmony between man and beast. The horse was no longer the symbol of his failure, but the embodiment of a hard-earned lesson. The billionaire felt a surge of emotion, watching the Appaloosa glide through the field with grace and power. It was a creature that had once been wild and uncontrollable, but now it was the picture of calm strength and mutual respect. The rancher's methods had worked, not through dominance, but through understanding, a lesson that had reshaped the billionaire's perception of control. When the rancher dismounted and walked the horse back toward the paddock, he turned to the billionaire. "It's not about breaking them," he said quietly. "It's about showing them they can trust you." The billionaire stood in silence, the weight of those words settling over him. The horse wasn't the only thing that had transformed, it was him too. He had learned that true power lay not in control, but in patience, trust, and respect. And with that realization, the billionaire knew that this was no longer just about a wild horse, it was about a new chapter in his own life, one where true strength came from understanding, not domination. In the days that followed, the billionaire began to see the world, and himself, in a different light. The Appaloosa, once a symbol of his failure and frustration, had become a living testament to patience, trust, and respect. The rancher's quiet wisdom had shown him that true mastery wasn't about force or control, it was about understanding the spirit of those you sought to lead, whether human or animal. The billionaire no longer viewed the horse as a possession to be tamed, but as a partner in a deeper journey of connection. He spent more time with the Appaloosa, working alongside the rancher to learn the art of horsemanship. With each lesson, the billionaire's sense of humility grew. He realized that in his pursuit of wealth and power, he had forgotten the simple but powerful truth: the best things in life cannot be bought. They must be earned through time, patience, and trust. As he watched the Appaloosa graze peacefully in the field, the billionaire felt a profound sense of gratitude. The horse had not only changed, it had helped him change. The final transformation was not just in the horse, but in the man who had learned the most important lesson of all: to listen, to trust, and to let go.